welcome back to the next panel, which is going to be moderated by Patrick Bolton, who organized the morning program, and he's with Imperial College, where he has a large ERC grant, which is partly funding the conference, and he's really one of the leading experts in this field. And it's a great pleasure, Patrick, that you will be moderating this panel, and the floor is yours. And I think you will introduce your panelists. Thank you very much.
Right. Welcome back, everyone. It's already fairly late in the afternoon. We've had a very intense and inspiring 2 keynotes, but certainly what we've covered this morning and with the keynotes doesn't nearly cover everything that we are interested in, and many more things to discuss, and in particular from a more practical and pragmatic perspective. So we have an excellent panel here on the topic of the role of finance. Let me introduce the 3 panelists to you. To my right, I have Eva Meyer, who is Chief Sustainability Officer and responsible for the sustainability activities of the BNP Paribas Group in Germany. And prior to that, Eva worked at Commerzbank. And I was actually wondering whether you were across the street here, but that was probably before this whole Pariser Platz was renovated. Over there, on the far right, we have Nils Bartsch. Nils is head of oil and gas research at Urgewald. Some of you may have heard of Urgewald. It's a German non-profit that is developing and maintaining data sets on the global fossil fuel industry, a critical contribution because, as we all know, you can only manage what you can measure. And then between Nils and Eva, we have Dirk Schoenmaker, who has had many roles over the years and is currently Professor of Banking and Finance at the Rotterdam School of Management. And he is the author of 2 leading textbooks. One is called Principles of Sustainable Finance, which was published at Oxford University Press, and more recently, Financial Markets and Institutions, a European Perspective, and finally, Governance of International Banking, the Financial Trilemma, also at Oxford University Press. So the way we're going to run the panel is each panelist will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we will open it up for questions. And if time allows, we'll do another round of 5 minutes. And I wanted to start with Eva and really hear your perspective as a sustainability officer at a major global bank. And how do you see? What's your response to what President Fabius told us earlier, that we need finance to be able to get the energy transition done? So how can we get the finance to make play its part, and where are we along the transition?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the possibility to be here today. And you see my notes, that was so inspiring, the keynotes before. So I had to take a lot because maybe I will refer to it. I think the title of our panel, Power of Finance, I totally believe in the power of finance. And I totally believe that we as a global bank do have the responsibility to allocate the capital into the right direction. So what did we do? For me, actually, the most important thing is education and awareness, to understand that there is an issue and to find a way how to tackle the challenge. And therefore, you really have to analyze your portfolio. And for us as a bank, it's not scope 1 or 2. For us, it's scope 3. What are we doing with our clients on the financing side, but also on an investment side? And then, of course, it's not only talking, you also need clear commitments. In 2010, we were one of the first banks introducing a sector policy for coal. Meanwhile, we have around, and Nils, maybe this is also something for you, we also have a clear exit path for coal, 2030 for Europe and OECD countries, and 2040 worldwide. And meanwhile, we do have 9 sector policies for agriculture, palm oil, etc., which serve as a kind of ESG minimum standard for the business partners we work with. And we also engage in external stakeholder groups, Principles for Responsible Banking, for example, but we're also founding member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. And that was actually also a huge push in the market, really having a commitment to have climate neutral portfolios until 2050 is a huge commitment. And we heard that before, if investors, banks, finance industry bundles up, it creates a push and it also creates a need for change. But 2050, it's still a very long way to go. So 2 years ago, we started with our first climate report. What gets measured also gets managed and also introduced for the biggest emitting sectors. Targets how we want to have the CO2 intensity reduced in our credit portfolio. So you see it's a lot of analyzing data, etc. But with a commitment, you maybe create a little bit impact because you push the market, but for us it's also engaging. I mean, of course, we could say we leave all our clients which are not 100% green at the moment, but that's not the way we want to work. We want to get our clients green. So actually for us, transition is the biggest factor. And for that, with our strategic plan 3 years ago, called GTS, Growth, Technology and Sustainability, we also introduced quantitative KPIs on the financing side, on the investment side, how we want to support. So,
Can I ask? Sorry for
No.
interrupting. So, when it comes to renewable energy development,
yes,
what is your sense? Is this a financial constraint, or is it also other constraints? What has been your experience?
We talked a lot about profit, and when it comes to sustainability, and to be resilient, having future-oriented business models, you do have 3 dimensions. And of course, it's the people and the planet, but it's also the profit. You have to make profit to have a sustainable business model. And for banks, of course, I would say when you talk about wind farms nowadays, it's more business as usual. But when we started to do project finance like that, it was not business as usual. Or when you look, also in Germany, I'm not sure if you're aware, but to be climate neutral until 2045, and we're only talking about climate, we are not talking about biodiversity or other topics which also have to be tackled. We need until 2030, and only until 2030, around 720 billion, which has to come mainly, of course, from the private sector. But the things which have to be financed, infrastructure projects, grids, etc., with, the financings are more long-term, which is a little bit challenging for risk-weighted assets on the one side. Then you have new technologies, you have higher risk, etc. So I would say that it's maybe a mixture of new, not really business as usual, more risky than before, but we're coming there. Maybe to have a positive note here, it sounds like nothing is possible, but we're coming there. I think banks, but also our peers, we did a lot. And when we talked before, I also strongly believe in ecosystems because the challenges are high. And I mean, as a bank, seriously, we are the platform in the middle of so many stakeholders, pension funds, investors, etc. But on the other side, we do have the corporates or the startups who need the money. And I think we can do much more to bring the right people together.
Okay, that's great. I will come back to
Okay.
some of those points later. But let me turn now to Nils, and maybe if you could just tell us, how you're making a difference. What is the biggest, in your view, what is the biggest contribution of Urgewald in terms of helping the financial community, transition to renewable energy?
Yeah, thank you. So Urgewald has been existing for over 30 years now, and it started with shedding light on controversial industry projects and the companies behind these projects, and eventually also the financiers of these projects. And after a while, after decades actually, the organization realized that it would be great to have a systematic approach to these problems. So to not only tackle one project at a time, not tackle one company at a time, but look at the big picture, look at eventually the entire world and at specific projects that are being developed and at the companies behind them. So what Urgewald does is we publish data sets, two main data sets, one on the coal industry and one on the oil and gas industry. And those data sets, they're unique in various ways, but the main USP is that we quantify fossil fuel expansion. So that means in the coal data set, you can clearly see which company intends to add how much new coal-fired power generation capacity to their power portfolio. You can see which company intends to build new coal mines, new coal infrastructure. But on the oil and gas side, you can also see which company builds new pipeline infrastructure, which company intends to move new oil and gas fields into production. So that's what we measure. And we do that because we feel that these business activities, they need more transparency. Financial actors, political decision makers, all of these people, also civil society organizations, academics, all of these people need more information to do research, but also to make better decisions. Our data sets are mainly, but not exclusively, used by financial institutions to make decisions that are connected to their climate strategies, implement, for example, divestment steps, or doing engagement, doing monitoring of fossil fuel exposure, all of that. I'm the oil and gas guy, basically, at Urgewald. So looking at oil and gas companies, I feel like they talk a lot about their Scope 1 emissions, which means emissions, for example, mainly emissions that emerge from their production activities, which is not unimportant, but of course we need to look beyond that. So talking about greenhouse gas intensity of oil and gas production is important, and they're very ambitious targets that need to be reached in a 1.5 degree world when it's about GHG intensity of production. But companies need to do more, and I'm talking much more. Not only build renewables, but build a lot of renewables. We've heard about renewables, and that some people think, not only some people, that oil and gas companies should not necessarily engage in these activities, but I think it's necessary because they have a lot of the financial means to do so. So right now, in 2022, according to the IEA, 2.7% of the average capital expenditure of oil and gas companies was being invested in renewables, 2.7%. And for some more progressive European oil and gas players, we're at 5 or 10% maybe at times. But that's also not the solution. It's part of the solution. But what's the most important, very first building block of the solution is to limit oil and gas expansion, to stop oil and gas expansion.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you a question about that. So oil and gas expansion, IEA tells us it shouldn't happen. It's not consistent with any kinds of limits that have been set by the Paris Agreement. And, to use the term of our last keynote speaker, Rob Engel, on termination risk, they're not, they're not behaving as they should behave, just running down the asset at the minimum, right? They're expanding the asset. So, I mean, what can you do from a governance perspective to try and stop that?
You're talking corporate governance perspective?
Yeah, corporate
from
governance
financial
perspective. Clearly,
institutions?
it's not the right thing to do. So, how can shareholders intervene to try and stop this by,
So what already has happened is that a lot of the more progressive financial institutions have incorporated basically a limit, or they basically said we're not providing any project finance for new oil and gas upstream projects. The more progressive, also a couple of very large banks have already done that, and that's a really good step in the exactly right direction. But this morning, we've also had a presentation by Monsieur Vallée, who talked about coal exit strategies. And we saw during his presentation that while on the project side, financial institutions tend to have if they have an exit strategy, tend to have quite good criteria. So they're not providing project finance for a specific project, that is coal. On the corporate level, so corporate loans, it's not as strict. And on the oil and gas side, that part is much more important, because corporate finance is a lot more important for oil and gas players than project finance is. So that for me would be a wish for the future, that more and more financial institutions would do this, because it would certainly help.
That's great. So maybe you want to chip in, Eva.
Just doing one remark. As BNP Paribas, we decided last year, I think it was February, that we don't participate in bond issuances for the big oil majors anymore, which I think is a big contribution to that as well. And then, of course, that means like short term losing money, but mid and long term getting our actions and engagement into the right direction. Yeah.
That's great. And I want to come back to some of these points later, but I want to give the opportunity to Dirk to say, you have 2 slides that you wanted to show us, right?
Before we do the slides, if you can turn it back.
Okay.
I would have one starting point. I think Robert Engel quite nicely said, we can tax, we can do subsidies, we can do regulation. That's all for government. But for the other place, we had hope, consumers, employees, corporations. And I would like to make a proposal that we, as a financial system, we should not only finance change, but we should also change the DNA of the financial system and of the corporate sector. And so take responsibility. And one way of doing that is moving from the shareholder thinking. We have some progressive shareholders at pension funds, but the majority is not. So the stakeholders, your grandchildren, they should be at the table. So shareholders and other stakeholders should be together at the table to make companies responsible. And I have a Fox EU column last week on that, shareholders or stakeholders. And I think that's extremely important. If we stick with shareholders, it may take a very long time before the theme of the conference, Responsible Capitalism, we get there.
I heard such a good quote on that, and that perfectly fits it. Last week, it's not about how much money we make, it's about how we make the money. And I like that so much.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And now to the 2 slides. Transition. I'm at Rotterdam, Erasmus University, and I have a colleague, Dirk Loorbach. And I learned that it's a separate science, transition economics. And this is his curve, the X-curve of transition dynamics. Starting at the top left, that's existing business. So these hotels, the Ingleside Hotel and fossil fuel companies, they will face extinction. At the bottom, we have the new stuff, renewables. And my point is, and as a social engineer, he says, we cannot predict this, exactly, the uncertainty. But what we are doing in the financial system is, we are financing the new things, and we hear good examples. So at the bottom, we do the new things. but most of the financial sector is very bad at stopping at the top because it's profitable today. So if you want to go from A to B, you need to do more B, renewables, but you need also to do less A. And doing less fossil fuels, that's the big problem. So we are too slow in stopping the old stuff. And moving to the next slide is translating that into Paris. So at the vertical axis, we have emissions, the baseline. So if we take today's financed emissions, whether you're a pension fund, a bank, or whatever, what you have today, and Paris, let's make it easy. We go in equal steps to net zero. What you see today is the top line, too little, too late, or too little, too sudden. So we move very slowly. And after a while, policies may increase, like with COVID, which was something different. But if a COVID moment would happen to policies, we may get a shock. It's very bad for financial stability. So I'm reasoning here from a central bank perspective who wants to manage financial stability, let's say the ECB. So rather than continuing on the current path of nudging but not forcing the financial sector to reduce, say, okay, let's take today 25 steps from 25 to 2050, each year -4%. So basically, I'm arguing we should do macro management because everybody's doing its best, but the carbon issue is a quantity, is a budget constraint, is a system limit. So best efforts by all players is not sufficient. So I'm arguing, and that is seen as very radical so far, but that central banks, and behind it, of course, the ministries of finance, should get serious, not talk anymore about the role of the financial sector, but just say, let's do it. Every year, -4%, and no excuses. And that's the dotted line. And if I ask my students, they say, no, we should do the bottom line. We should go faster. I leave that up to you, which line you want to follow. But the reason we take is, if you are as a central bank, you have in your mandate is financial stability. How can we do the transition with the lowest amount of disruption? So there's no need to give a climate mandate to the ECB. So you are responsible for financial stability. How to get there? The minimal disruptive pathway is an even reduction, but get started. And we don't get started, to be honest, because some banks do, others not. Some investors do, others don't. So get started at the system level. And then we get serious.
No, I hear you, Dirk. So, I mean, to come back to what Rob Engel said, to get investments in renewables, and what you emphasized, Eva, we need profitability. And there are multiple ways of achieving profitability. One is you could do in the electricity sector, you could have contracts for difference, right? That will give you higher earnings. You can reduce the risk. So on a risk-adjusted basis, it becomes profitable by doing what Dirk has suggested, by providing a very clear roadmap in terms of what types of the pipeline of investment, right? And then the third way you can guarantee profitability is through some form of credit enhancement by through blended finance and public by having some of the risk taken out by public funding. So where is BNP on all those margins? I mean, how are you How do you respond to
And I
these
think that was
options?
also an answer before. It's a mixture of everything. So I also believe that blended finance will be necessary. So what are we doing also in Germany to cooperate with KfW, for example, or NRW Bank or other development banks to see how we can find smart solutions together. Then when it comes to new technologies, I mean, there's so many great tech companies out there with rather, well, new technologies, not very financeable at first sight. So together with the Solar Impulse Foundation, we created a venture capital fund called Solar Impulse Fund. And the idea is really to do equity co-investments together with our clients, sometimes bigger corporates or wealthy wealth management people, to foster and accelerate the technology. We talked about scaling. We talked about scaling up. And I already said that, in a lot of external stakeholder groups. We are also joined the H2 Global Foundation here in Germany. That was an initiative by the German government to get the hydrogen economy starting, also discussing smart subsidy systems, for example, contracts for different. So there's a lot. There are a lot of things going on, and at the end, I think it is a mixture. And again, I really want to underline that we do need the ecosystems, and therefore forums like here, they're great to bring NGOs, academia, science, banks, corporates, etc., together.
Yeah, and so on the last point on the ecosystem, so the ecosystem is the client base, upstream, and then horizontal. You're not the only bank operating in the market. You're competing with other large banks, and so I'm just curious here. How much is competition policy constraining you in getting more cooperation across banks to precisely do the things that we've been mentioning?
It's a good question. I think, and I think you're right. I think banks were not used to work together before, or maybe not in that amount we need now. But I'm not sure if it was like more regulation or just wanted to be the best. But now we are happy if everyone is the best when it comes to climate change or all the topics we have to accelerate faster. And I think this is something which really makes me thinking very positive. There are so many coalitions. I mean, Net Zero Banking Alliance for banks, but also for asset managers. Who would have thought that like 20 years ago? Or in Germany, we were also one of the founding members of the Green and Sustainable Finance Cluster. Actually, banks coming together and really discussing, how are you doing that? How do you educate your people? How do you track? What kind of data do you use? So this really changed a lot. And I mean, also on the corporate side, there are so many joint ventures now, really trying to put good thoughts, technologies on the table. So that's something really great and really makes me hopeful.
And the competition authorities are moving, Patrick. The Dutch competition authority made a guideline that for sustainability reasons, you are allowed to work together. So that's an exception. Because I've been at the ministry and it's always a nightmare. You try to make a standard for the industry and then the competition authority tells you it's not allowed. But now for sustainability, they have made the standard. And he's going with that from the Netherlands to the European Commission to really, because we need cooperation. This morning we learned that it is a common pool resource, what we are managing. So you need cooperation, exactly as Eva is saying. And so the competition authorities are waking up to the issue and make carve out for cooperation in sustainability matters. And that's good news.
That is very interesting. Yes, I didn't know that. That's a super interesting development. And I mean, on the same theme, Nils, I mean, so you're providing all this very important data to all the institutional investors. You have all their addresses. You know, you could act as a almost like a convener. Urgewald could say, well, this is what we are recommending. Maybe investors should form coalitions. How far would you be prepared to go in that direction?
We actually do quite a bit of advisory work, but I mean, it requires someone on the other side who wants to listen. And sometimes people just want to take a quick look at the data, do some monitoring or do some exposure screening, and then they're done with it. But other times there are really deep talks about specific policy options that a financial institution has in mind. And then when they talk to us, it's mostly about what can be implemented by means of our data or other data that's out there. So I see a lot of movement as well. And I'm also happy about these different initiatives that are out there. It's just, and we probably all agree on that it's still going too slow. And that's what worries me. And Urgewald really tries to facilitate this process also throughout these talks that we have.
But so since you make I think this is something probably we would all agree with you. It's all going too slowly. It's great initiative. It's going too slowly. How can we make it go faster? How can we, the title of our conference today, how can we accelerate the transition? Where would you start? What would be a sort of a first idea where you would be prepared to put on the table?
What was mentioned before about central banks and regulatory authorities, I think that is really a very big factor. We've already seen that in France, where AMF and ACPR, so the Asset Management Market Authority and the Banking Authority, they have implemented mandatory exposure screening for fossil exposure. And then that means that financial institutions in France, the biggest ones, they need to report back on their exposure to the financial regulators. And it's just that. It's not any type of regulation.
And we know how to do it, because when we introduced the euro, there were a lot of market standards. And I remember at the Bank of England, but also here in continental Europe, the central bank and the regulators played a key role convening meetings of market players to get going. So I would suggest, we have later on the minister here, so that both the government and the central bank as public places convene these meetings of field building to get the players at the table and design common policies to get going. So the convening power of the public sector and academia. So as conferences like this and as academics, we can also play a big role in convening.
Absolutely.
Because we don't have a special interest.
Absolutely. And maybe also one remark, what you said also with the French banks, what we also did 2 years ago, and again about managing, we said, okay, until 2030, we want that 80% of our financing for energy production is low carbon technology. So really a clear target. So then we realized we're a little bit faster. So we even adjusted to 90% until 2030, which is also great. Last year, we were around 65% on low-carbon technologies, 35% still fossil fuels, so probably not fast enough. But when we would look at the exposure 10 years ago, it would have been like the opposite, like 10% in low-carbon technologies and 90% on fossil fuels. And what I really want to say and to highlight is to really report on it, to disclose, to have the data and to really analyze it also helps the transformation process. And when I look at our portfolio here in the last 10 years, there was a huge transformation process.
Okay, this is super interesting. I think what I'm taking away from your responses is that there's a lot of willingness to accelerate the energy transition in the financial industry, in the banking sector. There doesn't seem to be much opposition from your non-financial companies that you interact with, that you invest in, I haven't heard anyone say, oh, we're facing opposition from boards, etc. I haven't heard that from any of you. What you're all in agreement with, it seems to me, if I've understood correctly, is that what you're waiting for is more guidance, more predictability from governments, regulatory institutions, and that's what's holding back the acceleration to renewable energy. Did I get this right? I mean, you should disagree with me if I didn't get this right. Nils, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is the only place something should change. I still really feel like that the sustainability people at asset managers, banks, insurance companies that I regularly talk to, they, of course, understand the problem and they want to do something, but they also need to convince their superiors that something moves into a specific direction. And there it's not always so easy, because the people that work in sustainability at financial institutions are usually the most progressive ones.
True.
Yeah.
I think that's the example of the euro. There was only a few year time to change the standard. So there was not a 10-year agenda. There was a 2-3 year agenda to get things done. And I think that urgency we need, that you sit together and say, we make in 2 years an agenda to get going with binding limits and peer monitoring. So the urgency to do it in a quick way rather than in long-term meetings.
And one additional remark, and this is a question I really ask myself, but I don't have the answer or the perfect answer. As you said, when you talk also with corporate clients, they all understand what they do have to do. But when you look at the listed companies, the big ones, etc., and we talked about shareholder value and stakeholder value, it's still, very short-term looking. How are the quarterly results? Prices go up or down, etc. Very short-term, not mid and long-term view. When you look at the governments, Germany, you do have the 4 years. So of course, disruptive ideas, etc., can also be challenging because it's only for a short period. So I heard also a sentence last week. It was a great workshop. Before it gets better, it gets worse. But of course, when you have to invest a lot, it can be that the profitability goes a little bit down, and 2-3 years later, it goes up again. But you do need, the understanding, or how was it said, the voluntary awareness to accept that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I want to give an opportunity to the audience here. I know there are quite a few corporate governance experts, and maybe hear thoughts or questions about what has just been said. So I see you in the front seat, Herman, and you're as the chair of ECGI. I will give you the opportunity for the first question. No. And then a guy over there, you're going to go second. Yeah.
My feeling is that there is a little bit an underestimation of what is really happening at ECB. Because the ECB, and as you know, I've until recently closely involved from the top down on what's happening. But for the ECB, this is top priority. And it's also a top priority for the banks, because they know that if something goes wrong with their assets, they are in big trouble. So they understand this very well. Most of the banks that I know very actively invest in teaching their creditors, where they give loans to educate them, to stimulate them in thinking about sustainability. So I think we should not think that nothing is happening. I must also say what I think is slowing down the process, that everyone is waiting a little bit for the new accounting standards. And that is a problem. If we were much faster on the new accounting standards, that would really get a big thing moving at the banks and would get a big thing moving in the companies. But for the rest, I certainly do not join the opinion that the ECB is too slow. That I don't think so.
But you don't mean new accounting standards on top of the green taxonomy? I guess you mean more simplification, right? It's right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We have a question up there. Yeah.
Thank you. My name's Guy Jubb, and I was the former chair of the ECGI, and therefore the pecking order has been absolutely right. But Herman has provided me the segue to what I wanted to mention, because I am also a chartered accountant. And this is the first time today that we have heard the word accountants and accountancy being brought into the discussion. And the ecosystem Dirk mentioned, I was formerly, for 20 years, investment director at Standard Life Investments, one of the larger active investors, and I had particular responsibility for governance and stewardship. And I subscribe to the thrust of what Dirk was saying, that if we leave it to shareholders, Paris will not be done by the time that we are looking to do it, and hence the role of regulators, which has been referred to in this panel a lot, I believe, as being critical. However, in the ecosystem, the role of auditors and accountants is, I believe, now wanting. The relevance of auditors for financial statements is something which is still there, but investors are not engaging with auditors, and they have been not very good at picking up the front end of what they said about climate in the front end of the report and relating that to the financial provisions that are always required. I saw a headline this last week that half of the FTSE 100 companies had to restate their climate data. Something is wrong with the system. And when we look at corporate reporting, we are going to get a wealth of data coming through from the new EU regulations. I'm glad I'm not at the receiving end of that, because it's a lot of stuff to go through. But my question really and it's a question really just to sow a seed at the moment, is that going forward, where stakeholders have to be involved more, perhaps to achieve the progress that we're looking for, should the auditors and assurers be providing greater value to the public interest, but also to the investors, by actually being more actively involved in reporting on forward-looking information in relation to how boards are actually going about achieving their goals that they have stated, or are they not achieving them?
Yeah,
putting them on the spot.
That's a very good and deep question. It's a little bit like, it reminds me of the point that President Fabius made when he talked about the rise of climate litigation and how courts who are used to make decisions based on the past and the present had to change their outlook and also now integrate the future. And you're asking a similar question, but for accountants and auditors. So maybe if I can turn to the panelists and hear their thoughts on this. I mean, very difficult question.
So thank you very much for those remarks, because it's true. That will be a game changer. And at the end, if we can make a wish, it's an international accounting standard. But I think also with the implementation of the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, where financial institutions, but also corporates, really have to disclose and publish their transition plans, transformation, how they want to achieve it. As I would say, the second pillar to the financial statement, but equally important, and I mean, that's also new, equally important, that will definitely help. And it's also true with the question I raised with quarterly results, etc. Of course, then you will have a better picture, because you can you have all that sustainability, ESG information integrated in your decision-making process. No, it's true. I think that will definitely support it.
And if I can pick up on that, the original thought about integrated reporting was integrated thinking.
Yeah.
So we get the social and environmental and financial dimension integrated. We talk a lot about environment, but we need a just transition. That's the social dimension. And so there's a discussion whether auditors should do, the regular auditors should do the new CSRD stuff, or specialists should really be the regular auditors, because companies need to integrate it into report rather than an add-on on some emissions. And once you do the integrated thinking, the whole idea is to get different decisions. Because if you do integrated decisions and you see that certain indicators which are today costly to solve, but may future-proof your business model, then your thinking will become completely different rather than as a cost. Solving a low carbon is an investment for the future, not profitable yet, but it is an indicator for your future-proofing your business model and to stay away from this termination risk. So the trick is to integrate it in your thinking. And auditors can help by giving the data or verifying the data.
I'm more of the receiving end of all of the reporting documents that we need to take a look at in order to come up with a data set. So I am very much in favor of harmonizing things internationally if possible. That would be very great. And I think I don't have much to add to what was already said.
So I just wanted to follow up on this question. And we see a lot of the integrated reporting. There's actually quite a lot of information. But if you just take, for example, the kind of what the European Commission is trying to look at the moment, which is about this, the governance around the corporate reporting. I mean, you know, this is taking ages. I mean, there's a real sense in which this will be incredibly burdensome, because what we're saying is we're asking boards, the CEO, the CFO, the chair of the audit committee to actually sign not just the financial information, sign off, but also the non-financial information. And that is a huge task. Now, then Guy comes along and he suggests the auditors. The auditors need to have the capability also to sort of provide that external kind of view, a peer review of that. So we're talking about a huge task ahead. And we've been talking also in the European Union about these initiatives for a long, long time. My goodness, the progress is really slow. And we've got to, yes, it means perhaps more legislation, and that at the moment it's not a good, I shouldn't be saying this because chances are that I'm not be very popular, but we do need that coordination. Someone needs to start, the Commission needs to start really being very, very clear about the end game, the prize that we can obtain as a result of this. You know, that's.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make
I
an
hear
observation.
you.
The integrated reporting, the companies have got it. Is the CEO signing it off? No. And that is where the shareholders
The
will.
board members also
Very,
need to...
very important point you're raising, and unfortunately, it's not all up to the Commission. You know, other players involved. But if I could put you on the spot, and that's also true for Herman and Guy. I mean, if you had one proposal to make on reporting and standardization, what would that be?
Well, first of all, is just to have a clear sense around the end game in here. So what are the benefits of these? I think the benefits are enormous. So if you take two companies generating the same profit, one is doing that by doing lots of damage to climate, and another one is doing very good things for the environment and etc., but is generating the same profit. At the moment, these two companies are probably valued not that differently in the market, irrespective to what Professor Engel said earlier. The difference in evaluation in the forward-looking sense is enormous, of course. So be very clear about the price that we're talking about. The second one is about the metrics. I think we need to move. I think Herman talked about the accounting standards. I think that is really important, but also metrics around the kind of the climate, the comparisons within industries around simple metrics, so that companies are collecting the right information that can be compared. And Nils is right at the heart of that. And, you know, let's use Nils' data for that.
I would certainly be happy about it. So what we try to do is to simplify things on the fossil fuel side so that people can understand, for example, how much oil, so 1 million barrels of oil equivalent, taking gas into account as well, how much they want to add, and then making that comparable globally. That's rather simple. We don't put it into emissions because that would bring numerous problems. It would make it a lot more complex. But yeah, so when it comes to fossil fuels, we might have some solutions, but then a lot of other sectors are concerned as well, right? So yeah.
And Urgewald provides that information?
We do, yeah.
Right. Okay, that's important to say that. Okay, that's great.
Can I pick up on it? Can the CEO sign off? I think it's Corporate Governance Institute, where we are the host of here today. In the end, we need to change hiring policies. If you hire board members, they need to have the capability not only to understand the financial information, they still need it, but also the social, diversity, other things, inclusion, and the environmental. Otherwise, they're not fit for purpose. So it changes the profile, not of auditors, but also of board members. And that's challenging, but that's exactly what is needed if we want to go to the new world. Of taking responsibility, you need to understand it. And I hear from hiring agencies, these search, that a few years ago, only in 5% of profiles, it was sustainability, and all profiles had digitalization. And now that is changing. So the hiring profile of board members is under change to make the new world happen.
You asked Patrick what you would do, the one thing. And if I can suggest something, that is that in the public policy domain, we start building some priorities. Because we have a debate today on sustainability, and we want the ECB to do something. And the ECB is doing things and is pushing banks. And I can tell you, if you have a couple million loans outstanding lines, that takes a little bit of work to go through there. But then there's another conference like this, and that's on fraud and on black money. And what are they saying? The financial authorities should intervene. So they sent a team to the bank, and they say, could you please, of these 1,000 customers, check out over the last 20 years what their transactions have been. If you continue to combine these things, we will have a bank with one customer relations officer and 99 people working for the regulator. So I think that sustainability is important. So let's really make it a priority, and let's take some time for the rest. Not that I think that fraud is not important, it's really important. But asking everything at the same time is creating a mess.
Well
Sorry
taken.
for the practical point.
Very, very important, very important. Guy, do you have anything to add to that?
I endorse the thrust of what has been said by both. And the other thing, one other thing I would add to that is that in corporate governance and in large part in regulation, comply or explain has been the approach which was being used. That was developed by Sir Adrian Cadbury, he's largely developed by Sir Adrian Cadbury for the Cadbury Committee, when the UK capital markets were 50% owned by long-term institutions. They are now owned by 5% ownership by long-term UK institutions, and the degree of accountability for comply or explain. So I would actually commend consideration of moving from comply or explain to apply the principles and explain how you have done them, rather than actually being caught up with some of, and that's a seismic shift.
Okay, that's great. Very helpful. Marco is telling me that our time is almost up. I want to give a last chance to Eva, if you want to respond on these points.
No, maybe also just to add, because I agree to everything which has been said. I love the topic. And I'm originally coming from just studied finance, being a corporate banker, etc. I love the topic because it's key strategic. And what I think at the moment is kind of sad, it's more always about being compliant with regulation. We do have to come beyond being compliant with and see again the chances in everything we are discussing at the moment and being pragmatic.
Fantastic. Thank you for that last comment. Please join me